beginning of the movie, three friends discuss their late friend Sugi. Mon questions how sleep paralysis could have killed him, prompting Toger to explain that Sugi saw Madame Rahayu in a red dress at sunset in the tea plantation before she vanished. Jalou dismisses the story, but Toger continues, revealing that Sugi later heard someone singing Weeping Lover by Sidi Suryani. Sugi then had a seizure, screamed, "I'm sorry, Madame Ayu," while pointing at the ceiling, and appeared to struggle against an invisible force strangling him. Since it is Jalou's turn to watch the factory that night, he plays songs on his radio and starts drinking. After some time, the outside light at the factory begins to flicker, and a shadow appears on the wall, and Jarwo wakes up hearing some noise. Jalou hears a sound and immediately switches off the radio, shining his flashlight toward the noise. A cat emerges from the shadows, and Jalou, relieved, turns the radio back on and continues enjoying himself. After a while, he lies down and falls asleep. However, as soon as he dozes off, the lights begin to flicker, and the song Weeping Lover starts playing on the radio. Suddenly, someone calls out Jalou's name, jolting him awake in fear. As he looks around, he is terrified to see Madame Ayu's head floating in the air, and when he tries to flee, a rope wraps around his neck, strangling him. He struggles desperately to free himself, but he is dragged and left hanging in the air, ultimately leading to his death. 3 months later, Rara returns from her honeymoon. Her driver, Joko, mentions that it hadn't rained in the afternoons during her absence, but on her return day, it's pouring. He comments that she went straight into work mode, and Rara explains that she had to check everything after being away so long. Meanwhile, her husband, Sutan, notices a woman, but when Rara asks about it, he stays silent. The next day, Joko takes Rara to the factory, where manager Rohim reports a production drop due to poor harvests caused by unpredictable weather. Having worked there for 20 years, he says this is the worst he's seen and admits there's no solution to control the weather. That evening, Toger asks Joko if he's sure about not telling Rara about Sugi and Jalou's deaths, to which Joko warns him against it, saying it's in the past. Toger mentions the workers' fear and strange events since Madame Ayu's disappearance, but Joko denies her disappearance, claiming she went to the Netherlands, and tells Toger to leave. Meanwhile, Sutan says he doesn't understand how Rara can be so calm, saying he's seen some strange things since they returned to the house. Rara dismisses it, telling him it's all in his head. She gets up, approaches him, and says that after all, they vowed to start a new life together. Later that night, the lights in the house turn off automatically, and someone whispers, "Trinil?" Immediately after, something starts happening to Rara. Sutan wakes up, hearing her gasping, and asks what's wrong. He tries to wake her up and calls out to Joko for help. Joko hears his screams and runs to assist. During this, a force throws Sutan aside. Joko arrives, and Sutan urgently tells him to help Rara. Joko asks him to fetch water, and once he has it, he begins reciting prayers over the water and sprinkles it on Rara. She suddenly wakes up, asking, "What is going on here?" And Sutan explains that she was having a nightmare. She then asks Joko what he's doing in her room, and before he can answer, she orders him to leave. The next morning, Sutan apologizes to Joko for what happened the previous night, and Joko reassures him that he understands. Sutan recalls what Joko said in the car about the rain never falling in the afternoon and asks for clarification, to which Joko explains that when someone arrives at a place and it starts raining, it means that person is bringing luck to that place. Sutan reflects on their honeymoon, noting that Rara slept peacefully, but since returning to the house, he's seen a change in her. He suggests that maybe something in the house is making her uncomfortable. Joko responds that this has been Rara's home since she was born, so it's impossible for her to feel uncomfortable here. That night, Sutan reads a book about sleep paralysis. As he's engrossed in it, the frequency on the radio changes automatically, and the song Weeping Lover starts playing. Perplexed, Sutan changes the channel, but as he starts to walk back, the channel changes again, shocking him. He quickly changes the frequency once more, but it keeps switching back to Weeping Lover, causing him to unplug the radio in fear. But to his horror, he hears someone laughing. Terrified, he rushes back to his room, but he hears Rara screaming and pointing toward the window. Panicking, he flees and calls out for help, screaming Joko's name. Joko arrives, but the door slams shut and the lights go out. Terrified, he and Sutan approach the door, and seeing no sign of Rara inside, Joko opens the door, reciting the name of God. As they enter, they find Rara levitating in the air, prompting Joko to begin praying, and after a tense moment, she falls onto the bed as the lights flicker back on. Sutan rushes to Rara, and seeing Joko in her room, Rara asks, "What's going on?" She tells Joko to leave, and before leaving, he insists that she should pray before going to sleep. The next morning, Sutan comes across an article in the newspaper about an exorcist named Yusuf. Sutan visits the hospital to meet Yusuf, where he witnesses a girl running away, screaming. The hospital staff tries to catch and restrain her, but the girl collapses, and to everyone's horror, she becomes possessed by a demonic entity. Yusuf calmly approaches her, reciting prayers, and after a tense moment, he expels the demon from her body, causing her to faint. Yusuf tells the staff that it's done, prompting them to take the girl away. Sutan gets up and introduces himself to Yusuf, reminding him that they went to the same middle school in Malaysia. Yusuf takes Sutan to his office and asks why he's there, to which Sutan explains he moved to the city after getting a nursing job and asks about the scene he witnessed. Yusuf explains the patient was possessed, and when Sutan jokes about having an exorcist friend, Yusuf clarifies he's still a psychiatrist with an interest in supernatural cases. Sutan asks what sparked this interest, and Yusuf recalls a painful leg injury in middle school that led him to nearly end his life. A spiritual mentor saved him by revealing an evil spirit attached to him, and though skeptical at first, Yusuf believed after being cured. Sutan then asks for help, explaining his wife's sleep paralysis has worsened and seemed like possession last night. The next day, Yusuf visits Sutan's house and puts something into a glass of water while reciting prayers and tells Sutan to leave the water overnight, explaining that if the water remains clear by morning, then everything is fine, but if it turns dark, then he and his wife are in danger. Yusuf then asks if there is anything else he wants him to tell, but before Sutan can respond, Rara enters and asks what is going on, and she tells Yusuf to leave. That evening, Sutan explains to Rara that he called Yusuf to help her with her sleep paralysis, to which Rara insists that she is fine and asks why he is so afraid, daring to bring strangers into their private bedroom. Sutan explains that Yusuf is a friend from middle school and can help them, but Rara dismisses it, saying the house is not haunted. Suddenly, the lights go out, and she asks him to get her some matches. Sutan goes to the kitchen to find matches, and when he returns and attempts to light a candle, the wind blows and the windows open on their own. Sutan gets scared at this, and Rara takes the matches from him. She stands up and lights the candles, but gets terrified seeing Ayu's decapitated head on the table. Sutan faints in shock, and the head slowly turns towards Rara, whispering, "Trinil." The next day, Rara calls Yusuf to check on Sutan, and Sutan tells him she has returned. Yusuf asks, "Who?" And Sutan responds, "The flying head ghost." Yusuf notices that the water has turned black, and as he goes to check it, Rara says, "Whatever this is, I want you to get rid of it." Yusuf says he needs more evidence before starting the case and suggests they talk, but Rara interrupts, insisting, "Just get rid of it." That night, Yusuf begins researching the Saunders family and discovers that Rara's mother, Rahayu, mysteriously disappeared shortly after William Saunder's death. As he digs deeper, Yusuf's research leads him to a local legend about an entity known as the Kuyang, a flying, disembodied head with trailing organs. Yusuf explains that the Book of the Spirit's universe identifies the spirit as Kuyang, humans who practiced black magic for eternal life, but transformed into flying head ghosts preying on unborn or newborn babies. They also seek their bodies, as they often die gruesomely, their heads severed to halt the black magic. Sutan suggests summoning the spirit, but Rara interrupts, insisting it's useless, and demands Yusuf get rid of it, threatening to find someone else if he won't. Yusuf, unfazed, says he's starving and asks to eat first. As he attempts to remove the dish cover, Sutan stops him, and when Yusuf asks what's wrong, Sutan begins to back away in fear and says now he can open it. Yusuf removes the cover dramatically, scaring Sutan, who is relieved to find food underneath. As Yusuf begins to eat, Rara gets terrified seeing the Kuyang outside the window. The Kuyang then disappears, and Rara demands Yusuf to deal with the spirit immediately, to which he agrees, but warns that he'll need their full cooperation to take the case. The next day, Yusuf visits their house, and Sutan leads him to William's office, saying, "You can use this room." That night, Yusuf performs a ritual to summon the spirit, but Rara interrupts, saying she told him to get rid of it, not invite it in. Yusuf responds that if an evil spirit is haunting their house, it means it has a message for them. Rara insists they don't need to communicate with it, but just then, someone knocks on the door. Yusuf gets up and cautiously approaches the door, and we see a woman knocking on the door. But when he opens it, no one is there. Suddenly, the lights in the house begin to flicker, and the Kuyang enters, calling Rara Trinil and demanding she return her body. Rara freezes in terror, but Yusuf intervenes. However, the Kuyang throws him aside, and Rara flees in panic as the Kuyang chases her, telling her to return her body. All the doors slam shut, trapping Rara and Sutan, and the Kuyang moves closer, but Yusuf grabs her hair and commands, "Go back to your world." He then pulls her away and throws her out of the house, causing the Kuyang to vanish. The next day, Yusuf sneaks into Rara's father's room and is surprised to find that there isn't a single picture of Rahayu. He picks up a book lying there, and as he does, some photos fall out. Yusuf picks them up and examines them, and behind one of the photos, he notices the words "me" and "Trinil" written on it. Just then, a rocking chair begins to rock on its own, but when Yusuf turns to look, it stops. Later that evening, Rara enters her father's room and notices someone must have been there. Meanwhile, at the factory, Mon and two other workers discover Toger's lifeless body hanging. Later, Joko stops the workers and asks, "Are you just going to abandon the tea plantation? And how dare you leave Rara alone?" Mon responds, "This place is cursed, and I don't want to die," with the other workers agreeing. They then leave, abandoning the plantation. Later, Rara asks, how could they keep their deaths from her? And Rohim explains they didn't want her or Sutan to worry. When Rara asks if the police know, Rohim says they kept it between themselves and the families. Sutan asks, "So they all died in their sleep?" And Joko confirms, but Rohim clarifies that Jalu and Toger died by hanging. Rara demands the truth, and Joko admits Jalu and Toger hanged themselves, while Sugi and others died of heart attacks in their sleep. Some deaths involved self-strangulation, possibly linked to sleep paralysis. Rara insists they keep this secret, especially from the police. Later that night, Yusuf performs a ritual, telling the spirit that he knows she is furious. He promises to help her and asks for a sign. Suddenly, a light begins to flicker, and in the mirror, he sees an old woman singing a song while holding a mask. Yusuf turns around, only to find Jarwo standing behind him. Jarwo takes Yusuf to an old house, where the old woman thanks him for coming, saying she has been waiting for him. She introduces herself as the widow, and explains that she is a close relative of Rahayu. Meanwhile, Sutan goes to William's office looking for Yusuf, and is shocked to find his research, wondering what he is up to. The widow asks Yusuf, "Didn't Rara promise you a lot of money to help her? Then why betray her and help Rahayu instead?" To which Yusuf responds, "Because to end something, we have to know where it started." The widow replies that getting rid of Rahayu is not the answer, but he must do the opposite. And when Yusuf asks how well she knew Rahayu, the widow reveals that she gave birth to her. She explains that Rahayu was born on the night before Kliwon Friday and was a different child. Rahayu dreamed of becoming a madam by marrying a rich man, so to realize her dream, she sought out a famous shaman. The shaman performed a black magic ritual and made her drink the blood of a sacrificed chicken, and since that night, she sold her soul to the devil. After selling her soul, Rahayu blossomed, and William Saunder became captivated by her beauty. Her dream finally came true. She became a madam, and William treated her like a queen, but it didn't last. She didn't want Rara and even tried to kill her. Rahayu believed that by giving birth to Rara, she had stolen her dreams. William spent most of his time with Rara, and even named her Trinil. Rahayu started hating Rara, and one day, when Rara asked her to play, Rahayu told her, "When I throw the ball, you go fetch it." Rahayu threw the ball, and Rara rushed to get it. Rahayu watched from a distance as Rara stepped down to fetch the ball, and just as Rara was about to fall, Sugi caught her. At that moment, William arrived and thanked Sugi for saving her. Years later, William tells Rara that after he's gone, the Saunder plantation will belong to her, and mentions that he had his notary friend take care of the legal documentation. Rahayu becomes furious at William's decision, but William asks her, "Do you think you can manage a plantation?" He says, "You only care about putting on makeup and wasting my money." Rahayu snaps, "If you don't change the will to put my name on it, I'll kill Trinil." To which William asks, "Do you have the heart to kill your own flesh and blood?" In response, Rahayu grabs a gun and points it at him, asking, "Do you think I'm kidding?" She admits that I married you for your money and warns him to change his will or he will lose his daughter. William suffers a heart attack, and the doctor informs Rara that they can still control and reduce the risk of it worsening. The doctor assigns Sutan to care for and monitor William's condition, suggesting that Rara maintain a calm and peaceful environment to help prevent further complications. The widow says that the day William became ill marked the beginning of the war between Rahayu and Rara. Later, Rahayu changes the will and tells William to sign it. She places a clip around Rara's throat, warning William that if he doesn't sign, she will kill Rara, and with no other choice, William reluctantly signs the paper. A few days later, William confides in Rara, revealing that her mother sold her soul to the devil. He assures her, "If she ever tries to hurt you, I have something that can protect you." We then see that one day, William met Rahayu's mother, who gave him a book containing Rahayu's secret. William hands Rara the book, saying this will protect her and reassure her that everything will be all right. A few days later, Rara overhears Rahayu talking to Sutan, saying she has an offer for him. She asks, "What if I give you a quarter of my wealth?" Sutan remains silent, and Rahayu continues, "A quarter of William's wealth could buy you a hospital, and you wouldn't have to keep doing this job." She then suggests we get rid of William first, and then Rara. That night, William is startled awake by a noise, and to his shock, he discovers Rahayu and Sutan together. The betrayal overwhelms him, triggering a heart attack that leads to his death. Rahayu rushes to check on William, and, upon confirming he is dead, she begins to laugh. However, at that moment, Rara bursts in and severs Rahayu's head with a machete. Rara then picks up Rahayu's decapitated head, moves towards Sutan, and tells him, "I'll forgive you, but only if you marry me because 1/3 of this estate shall belong to you." After this, Rara and Sutan take Rahayu's body and decapitated head to the factory, where they dig a grave and bury her body. Rara carefully places the decapitated head atop the grave and instructs Sutan to pour gasoline over it. She then sets the head on fire, and they watch the flames consume it. Unbeknownst to them, Jarwa watches everything from outside. Yusuf is stunned by the revelation, and the widow goes on to explain that the bad weather, pests, the pandemic, and the workers' deaths were all caused by Rahayu, who doesn't want Rara to inherit William's wealth. She tells Yusuf that his presence is crucial here, as only he can end the curse and stop the terrors by returning Rahayu's head to her body. She also mentions that Rahayu died at 2 a.m., so he should reunite her head and body at the same time. Just as Yusuf and Jarwo are about to leave, a masked man attacks and kills Yusuf. It is then revealed that the attacker is Sutan, who decapitates Yusuf and commands Jarwo to bury his body. Meanwhile, Rara suddenly wakes up from her sleep and finds that Sutan missing from the bed. As she comes out looking for him, Rahayu appears in her room and then calls her Trinil. Rara firmly responds that only her father is allowed to call her that. And when she turns, Rahayu demands that she return her body. Angrily, Rara retorts that she has tormented her all her life and now wants to haunt her from beyond the grave. Enraged, Rahayu hurls Rara out of the room, prompting Rara to escape. But she slips and tumbles down the stairs. Rahayu then comes out and approaches Rara, taunting, "Come play with mother." In a panic, Rara approaches a door and attempts to open it, only to find it locked. As Rahayu moves closer, Rara desperately runs to her father's room and locks herself inside. As this unfolds, Sutan arrives at the factory, where Rahayu's body is buried. Meanwhile, Rara loads her father's gun, but just then, the phone suddenly starts ringing. Rara cautiously picks up the phone and says hello, only to hear Rohim's voice on the other end. Desperate, she begins crying for help, but the voice soon shifts to Rahayu's, demanding, "Give my body back." Rara disconnects the call, but then, the TV suddenly turns on and a video of Rahayu plays, showing her dancing and singing a song. Shocked, Rara watches in horror as Rahayu begins emerging from the screen, and in a panic, Rara shoots at her. Rahayu's body falls to the floor, leaving only her head floating. Terrified, Rara tries to escape, but the door slams shut and Rahayu's voice echoes, telling her there is no escape. As she begins to advance, Rara manages to enter her father's bedroom, but even there, Rahayu relentlessly pursues her. Rahayu lifts Rara into the air with her powers, tightening her grip. Meanwhile, Sutan places Rahayu's skull on her grave, finally reuniting it with her body before burying it together. This act weakens Rahayu, and she tells Rara that it's not over before disappearing into the darkness. Now, with everything calm in Rara and Sutan's life, Rara suggests visiting her father's grave after lunch, and Sutan agrees. However, they drink so much that Rara tells Sutan they should go to their room and visit her father's grave later. As they head upstairs, Joko approaches them, saying there's something he wants to discuss. Sutan, in a tipsy haze, tells him that he and Rara would like to thank him, adding that he has always been respected by their family. Joko responds, saying that Jarwo has told him everything, and asks if they should bury Rahayu's body according to Sharia law, so her spirit can rest in peace. Sutan pulls Joko aside, smiling, and says, "How about tomorrow we visit the car dealership, and you pick any car you want?" Joko thanks him, humbly adding that wealth is only a temporary gift from God. Rara, amused, laughs and approaches them. She pushes Sutan aside and tells Joko, "It's true, wealth is a temporary gift from God, but as humans, we should be able to take care of it." She then warns him, "Everything you know about my mother, keep it as our secret, or you'll face the consequences." That night, Rara decides to relax in the bathtub, but as she does, the bathroom door creaks open on its own. Thinking it's Sutan, she calls out for him to come in, mentioning it's been a while since they took a bath together. However, we see that Sutan is actually in the bedroom, waiting for her. Rara eventually enters, and he asks, "Aren't you taking a shower?" To which she replies no, and proceeds to take off her bathrobe. Sutan turns to her with a smile, but to his horror, she transforms into Rahayu, and the lights in the house begin to flicker. Meanwhile, Rara watches in horror as Rahayu's head emerges from the water. They both scream in terror, and Rahayu violently throws Sutan out of the window. Rara rushes to the bedroom, frantically searching for Sutan, and gets horrified to find his lifeless body outside. Just then, Rahayu calls out her name, and to Rara's terror, a demonic version of Rahayu attacks her and attempts to throw her out of the window. However, at that moment, Joko bursts into the room with a ustad, distracting Rahayu. The ustad begins reciting prayers, and Rahayu reaches out toward him in fury, but Joko and the others join the ustad. After a tense struggle, they manage to overpower Rahayu, and in a final, violent burst, an explosion erupts, signaling their victory. Rara's grandmother rushes to her side, but Rara pushes her away, saying she doesn't want to be with her. Joko asks Ustad to help, but he calmly replies that it's okay, saying she needs to vent her feelings, as it is an important step toward acceptance. Grandma, filled with sorrow, admits that she couldn't control her daughter. And just then, Rara sees her father, who asks, "Are you done throwing your tantrum?" He gently tells her that her mother is gone and that holding on to anger now is pointless. Rara says, "She always hated me, so I hate her." To which William says, "I know, but it's over now." Rara says, "I lost you because of her." To which William tells her to stop holding on to hatred and anger, urging her to forgive, saying only then will you find peace. He says, "Be kind because kindness will attract all the good things to you." He then steps closer, embracing her, offering comfort and closure. Next, as Rara and her grandmother return from Rahayu and Sutan's burial, 2 police officers approach and ask Rara to come to the station to answer questions about her husband's death. Later, at the police station, Rara gives her statement, telling the officer that Sutan had been depressed and stressed since they returned from their honeymoon. When asked if she knew the reason, she replies that perhaps he wasn't happy with their marriage and chose suicide as a way to leave her. On their way home, Joko asks Rara if it's okay with her. He and Roheim would like to persuade all of their friends to return and start working again. He explains that the plantation needs to keep running, and she also needs to move on with her life. When they return home, Rara thanks Jarwo and Joko, and then she approaches her grandma to embrace her. Later that night, Yusuf's hand emerges from the ground, and the movie ends there. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the chills, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a scare. Until next time, stay spooky.